They say you should never mix family with business. I always thought that was just a saying until she walked in. Audrey Langston, 29, fresh out of some overpriced MBA program in San Francisco. Blonde, confident, and so eager to prove herself that she didn't bother learning the names of half the people who kept the company alive, including me. I'm Ethan Carter, 58. Spent 21 years running logistics and operations at Langston Tech, back when her father still gave a damn about integrity, when the place made more than just investor slide decks and fancy mission statements. The day Audrey fired me, she didn't even look up from her tablet. "We're going in a new direction," she said, like she was offering me a gluten-free menu. "You've been here long enough." I blinked once, nodded, and stood up. No shouting, no pleading, no reaction she could twist into aggressive behavior. I'd seen this coming. What she didn't know, what no one in that freshly minted executive team knew, was what was buried in my contract, 6 pages deep under the legal jargon and HR fluff. A clause her father had personally insisted on a decade ago. A clause that was about to turn her sleek little takeover into a slow-motion train wreck. I walked past the interns she'd promoted to project leads, past the new culture wall she installed in the lobby with words like innovation and disruption painted in pastel blues. They couldn't even meet my eyes. I'd hired most of them, trained them, cleaned up their mistakes, and now they stood there like statues while I packed my life into a cardboard box. The warehouse still smelled like steel and machine oil. Real work. Not her type. Her perfume smelled like overpriced sunscreen and artificial citrus. I drove home in silence, the only sound the rattle of pens and paperweights shifting in the box beside me. My wife, Emma, died 6 years ago. Cancer. That was when Walter Langston, Audrey's father, quietly let me shift to a 4-day week so I could care for her. "Family comes first," he'd said back then. Now his daughter couldn't even spell loyalty if it wasn't a trending hashtag. I opened the old file cabinet in my study. There it was, my employment contract. Still in the original envelope, signed in blue ink. Section 14. In the event of termination without documented cause, including but not limited to redundancy, restructuring, or strategic misalignment, employee shall be entitled to severance equal to 24 months of final base salary, payable in full within 30 days. I made a single phone call. Victor Gray, corporate attorney, ruthless, brilliant, and someone who owed me a favor. He picked up after one ring. "Ethan," he said, like he'd been expecting this day, "tell me she didn't read the clause. She didn't even open the folder." Victor laughed, low and mean. "Let's make this fun." The next morning, while Audrey posed on LinkedIn about making hard leadership decisions, Victor emailed their legal team a scan of the contract and a request for immediate settlement. The response came 6 hours later, from a junior associate named Ruben, full of boilerplate nonsense about policy reviews and escalation to appropriate departments. Translation: they were panicking. Audrey had cleared out 7 of us in one day, everyone over 50, heads of engineering, procurement, manufacturing. She called it streamlining. We called it arrogance. One of them was Marsha Patel, my right hand in logistics for 11 years. Another was Greg, a quiet genius who kept the ERP system from collapsing every quarter. All gone. No thank you. No notice. Just fresh perspectives. I spent the next day drinking coffee with people who'd been gutted by her crusade. None of them had severance. None of them had contracts like mine. But they had something else. Trust in me. I told them to wait. Be patient. There were moves happening Audrey couldn't see. She'd traded experience for buzzwords, loyalty for flash, and there's always a cost to that kind of stupidity. I drove across town that night to meet with someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. Nolan Reyes, Chief Executive Officer of Vector Core Manufacturing, one of our biggest vendors for custom parts. We'd built a relationship over 2 decades, old-school handshakes and late-night calls to solve shipping disasters. Nolan leaned back in his chair, thick arms crossed, his silver beard twitching when I told him what happened. "She fired you?" he said, eyes narrowing. "She doesn't understand what kept that place alive." "No," I said calmly, "but she will." I told him what was coming, how I planned to use the severance payout to start something leaner, sharper, something built on skill, not slogans. "You'd have your first contract in hand by Q4, I added. Nolan didn't even hesitate. "You get your people together. I'll send the paperwork tomorrow." I shook his hand. The same way I had 20 years ago. No NDAs, no drama. Just trust. As I walked out of his office, the sky was purple with the last light of day. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Momentum. She'd opened the door. Now I was walking through it with steel-toed boots. The next morning, Langston Tech's board received a quiet letter from Victor demanding full execution of the severance clause within 10 business days. Audrey was still reviewing vendor contracts when the news hit her inbox. I could only imagine her face. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, she called me directly for the first time since the firing. "Ethan," she said, voice brittle, "we may need to discuss this clause." "It's not a discussion," I replied. "It's a contract." She tried to posture, to bluff, talked about optics, PR, the press. "You could drag this out, you know." I said nothing for a beat. Then I replied, "Audrey, this isn't revenge. This is just the price of not paying attention." She hung up. No goodbye, no apology, just a click. I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned back to the notes I'd been drafting. My company had a name now, Ironfield Solutions. My logo designer was already at work. My engineers were already meeting in cafes and garages. And Marcia, she'd agreed to head operations. She texted me a single line that night. "Ready when you are, boss." I smiled. Game on. 2 days after Audrey hung up, Victor received a formal response from Langston Tech's legal team. They weren't denying the clause. They couldn't. Instead, they tried to renegotiate. 6 months severance, then 8. Then a carefully worded 12-month transitional goodwill package tied to a non-compete. I rejected them all without blinking. "You think they'll go to court?" Marcia asked me over black coffee in her garage, which now served as our unofficial HQ. "If they do," I said, "they lose more than the case. They lose credibility. They dragged out my termination without cause. I didn't even get a formal review in 2 years. Victor's already drafted the litigation trigger. They're bluffing." She nodded. "So, what's next?" I tapped the folder on the table. Vendor lists, engineering blueprints, contacts I'd made in 2 decades of backroom firefighting. We build faster than they expect. We take the contracts they ignore. And we do it without their arrogance. Across town, Audrey was busy bleeding talent. 3 of the engineers I'd mentored had quit in the past week. 1 joined a startup. 1 was headed to Boeing. The last, Tyler, a kid with a knack for lean systems, was already coding our first logistics module. He showed me a dashboard that night that rivaled what Langston had paid $1.2 million to develop last year. I asked him how. "Because I care," he said. "Because you're building something real." That stuck with me. I wasn't building to get even. I was building to matter. And if you're into stories like this, about power, betrayal, and rebuilding stronger, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. 3 days later, I got a call from Audrey's assistant, a nervous voice trying to sound composed. Miss Langston would like to meet in person. I said I'd think about it, then didn't respond. Let her sweat. The following morning, Victor called. They're ready to settle. Full 24 months. No NDA just like that, I asked. He chuckled. Let's say someone on the board found out she never read the contracts before firing anyone. They're worried about wrongful termination lawsuits now. Yours is the warning shot. The money hit my account by Friday, $410,000 before taxes, more than I'd ever seen at once. But the real currency was momentum. Audrey still thought this was over. That cut in a check meant closure. She had no idea what I was already building beneath her feet. I met with Nolan again, this time at a warehouse near the old rail yard. Big, dusty, with potential. I walked the floor with Marcia, already sketching how operations would flow. Give me 60 days, I told Nolan. We'll be operational, lean, and ready to ship. He just grinned. Make it 45, and I'll throw in the CNC equipment we pulled from that closure in Toledo. I did the math. That would cut our machining costs by half. Deal. Meanwhile, inside Langston Tech, things were starting to crack. A quiet tip came from Greg, the systems guy Audrey had pushed out. He'd built the company's procurement algorithms and left a little surprise behind. An auto-flag function that detected budget violations and emailed them anonymously to 3 board members. It was a fail-safe I'd asked for years ago. They never disabled it, Greg said. And guess what? Audrey's been misclassifying bonuses as R&D expenses. I nearly laughed. She was hiding salary hikes under innovation grants. Typical. The emails had already triggered concern. And in the same week, Langston's biggest client, Merit Industrial, missed a shipment deadline for the 3rd time that quarter. They called me. Not Nolan. Me. I met them in a glass-walled boardroom, wearing a jacket I hadn't touched since my wedding. The room was tense, formal. The purchasing director, a man named Harold, shook my hand with both of his. If you're building something new, he said, we'd like to hear your pitch. I made it simple. Shorter lead times, veteran staff, integrity, and transparency. I won't promise what I can't deliver, I finished, but I'll die before I let your assembly lines shut down because of us. The silence after that told me everything. They were in. You start this quarter, Harold said. And if Langston asks, we're expanding our supplier diversity, not replacing them. I walked out of the building and exhaled. Wind cut across the pavement, but I didn't feel cold. I felt ready. Back at the warehouse, Marcia had set up an old-school corkboard with pinned photos of every team member. Red strings connected functions, roles, partnerships. It looked like a crime wall, and maybe in a way it was. A map of quiet revenge, measured in steel and contracts instead of violence. We started assembling our prototypes with borrowed machines and hand tools. Tyler coded at a furious pace. Marcia ran vendor negotiations like a general, and I spent 12-hour days calling contacts, securing space, vetting hires. Everyone we brought on had one thing in common. They'd been underestimated, overlooked, or betrayed. Ironfield wasn't just a company, it was a sanctuary for the dismissed. On a Tuesday night, Nolan invited me to dinner. You hear the latest, he said between bites. Audrey's selling off their packaging division. I blinked. That's their bottleneck control. If she outsources that, Quality goes down. Nolan nodded. And guess who picked up their old packaging crew? Don't tell me. Already signed. They start next week under us. I leaned back, stunned. Audrey was gutting her own infrastructure to make the balance sheet look healthy, but all she was doing was feeding our machine. Then came the call that nearly stopped me cold. Walter Langston, her father. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. He sounded tired, older. Ethan, he said quietly, I made a mistake. I handed her the company too soon. You didn't just hand it to her, I said. You left the room. He didn't argue. I thought she'd grow into it. But now, I hear what you're building, and I want to know if there's a way to make it right. You're still on the board? I asked. Majority vote, he replied, but silent until now. I stayed quiet for a long time, then said, there might be something. We arranged a meeting. Quiet, private, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to think beyond revenge, beyond correction, toward legacy. What if Ironfield didn't just replace Langston? What if it absorbed it? Audrey would never see that coming. She'd fired me like I was some janitor past his prime. Like experience was a weight, not a weapon. But that weight was now an anchor, pulling her whole empire down. I looked at the calendar, 37 days since I'd been fired, and we were weeks from full-scale launch. The empire was already cracking. She just didn't know which wall would fall first. 42 days after Audrey fired me, I sat in a nondescript hotel conference room across from Walter Langston and 2 board members, none of whom had spoken publicly since Audrey's strategic realignment began. They all looked older, paler. Even Walter, once the commanding force behind one of the fastest-growing industrial firms in the Midwest, barely met my eyes. She's running it into the ground, said one board member. Client loss, margins collapsing, internal chaos. Walter sighed, fingers folded in front of him. We hoped she'd find her footing. We gave her time, too much time. I didn't argue. I just opened the folder I'd brought and slid it across the table. Ironfield Solutions is fully operational. 2 major contracts secured. 8 former Langston Tech employees already working with us. I have funding, equipment, and a staff who'd walk through fire for me. What do you want, Ethan? Walter asked. You already won the severance. You've got your own company. Why sit here with us? I leaned forward. Because this isn't about just taking what's mine. It's about preserving what matters. The clients, the reputation, the people who still show up every day hoping someone finally makes a real decision. I paused. I'm proposing a reverse integration. Langston Tech merges into Ironfield. You retain your name and patents, but management control and operations shift to my team. They exchanged glances. Walter didn't move. She'll never agree. Then don't ask her. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Walter said, You'll need a majority shareholder vote. I nodded. I've already spoken to 3 silent partners. They're ready to back this, if the numbers add up. Do they? Give me a week. I walked out of that room with a dry throat and a heart pounding like I'd just sprinted through a fire. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about legacy. Audrey had torched the foundation her father spent decades building. I wasn't going to salvage it. I was going to rebuild it, on my terms. But first, I needed evidence. The kind that couldn't be ignored. I texted Jennifer, still inside Langston's quality control department. Loyal, quiet, observant. Anything I should know? I wrote. The reply came an hour later. You should see what's happening with the new vendor accounts. I'll send files tonight. That night, I opened the email on my home monitor. PDF scans, purchase orders, a spreadsheet with red-flagged anomalies. Audrey had been quietly redirecting shipments through shell vendors, double billing, padding invoices, selling company assets through third-party companies she controlled. It was fraud, blatant, and if I was reading the structure right, it was all being funneled through a holding account in the Caymans. I called Victor. He was silent as I described what I saw. "Can you prove she benefited directly?" he asked. "Not yet, but Jennifer's still looking. She says there's one more file, a signed authorization buried on her executive drive." "We'll need that," Victor said. "If we're going to bring this to the board, we'll need undeniable proof of breach of fiduciary duty. That's how you win the vote. And if we don't find it, then we bury her with numbers, show the board that she's losing money, killing retention, and hemorrhaging talent. But if that document exists, Ethan, he let it hang. He didn't need to finish. With that proof, it was over. Audrey would be done." Days later, Jennifer sent it. A single-page scanned PDF, her initials, her login timestamp, a redirect approval authorizing a vendor contract signed to a company with her name listed in the ownership filing. Game, set, match. Victor prepared the board presentation. I prepped the ops deck. Marcia coordinated the logistics flow and outlined how we'd transition supply chains under Ironfield. And then I made a call I'd been dreading, to Audrey. She answered on the fourth ring. "This is unexpected," she said. Her voice still had that fake patience she used on interns and baristas. "We need to talk," I said. "And this time, I'm not bringing a folder. I'm bringing the board." Silence. Then flatly, "You've been planning this the whole time, haven't you?" "No," I said. "You started this the moment you ignored the people who built that company, the moment you decided experience was disposable." "You're making a mistake," she said sharply. "I'm the future." "You're a press release in heels," I replied, "and the future doesn't belong to liars." I ended the call. No threats, no drama, just like the day she fired me. It came full circle. The board meeting was held at a neutral site, a quiet university campus conference hall off the interstate. 11 members, one agenda. By the time Audrey walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys and a publicist, half the votes were already locked. She didn't know it yet. I presented our findings, the decline in revenue, the talent drain, the manipulated contracts. Then Victor played the final card, the scanned vendor contract with her signature and beneficiary ownership tied directly to her. She didn't blink, didn't even flinch. "This is a smear campaign," she said coldly. "You're all afraid of change, afraid of strong women leading." But her voice cracked at the word leading. The chairman stood. "The vote is open." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. It took 5 minutes. 8 votes for the transition. 2 abstained. 1, hers, against. It was over. Walter looked broken as he walked up to me afterward. "She's my daughter," he said. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were," I said quietly, "but she wasn't." "What will you do with the company?" he asked. I looked out at the others, Jennifer, Tyler, Greg, even some of the interns Audrey had mistreated, now standing behind me. "We'll fix it," I said. "Not just the numbers, the culture, the spirit. We'll make it mean something again." Audrey didn't wait for goodbyes. She stormed out before the documents were signed. Her publicist followed. One of the attorneys stayed, asked if there was any chance of settlement. I didn't answer. I turned to the board. "Let's begin the handoff." The rest of that week was a blur of forms, transfers, handshakes, strategy sessions, and celebration. But for me, it wasn't joy. It was relief. 6 weeks ago, I was just another forgotten veteran, shoved out by someone too arrogant to see past a degree. Now, I was building an empire out of the ruins of her ambition, and I wasn't done yet. 84 days after Audrey Langston fired me, I stood in the middle of Langston Tech's former innovation wing, now the main operations floor of Ironfield Solutions. The glass walls were gone. We replaced them with steel racks, open workstations, and real tools. The air smelled like oil and solder again. The rhythm of drills and presses sang in the background like a heartbeat finally returning. Marcia moved past with a clipboard and a rare grin. "We're ahead of schedule. 3 orders already packed for shipment." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about what came next. Audrey was gone. After the vote, she left town within days. The last I heard, she'd fled to Miami, leveraging what she had left to launch a consulting firm. She still hadn't said a word to me. No apology, no email, not even a message to her father. Walter resigned from the board 2 weeks after the transition, quietly, with a handshake and a look I couldn't quite name. It wasn't guilt, not fully, just a recognition that some mistakes can't be fixed, only survived. And now, I was in charge, not just of Ironfield, but of everything Langston used to be. Contracts, staff, legacy, reputation. I didn't celebrate. I rebuilt. I called every client Langston had burned. I personally walked through their plants, promised better service, and delivered it. Our first quarterly numbers shattered projections. We landed 3 more long-term contracts, including Merit Industrial, who pulled out of their Langston Tech obligations entirely. The transition was complete. Ironfield was no longer the upstart. We were the standard, and still, I wasn't satisfied. Not until I knew the people who came with me, the ones Audrey discarded, were safe. Tyler had been promoted to lead systems engineer. Jennifer was now head of quality control, running her lab with the same precision. But now, with respect. Greg came back too, now overseeing cybersecurity. Marcia, she had an office across from mine, though she still refused to decorate it. Efficiency over vanity, she'd say. I respected that. We all carried scars. But now, we carried them into battle, not as wounds, but as proof that we'd survived something brutal. One Friday afternoon, Walter called me. I hesitated before answering. "Ethan," he said, "I saw the quarterly report. It's remarkable." "It's not about numbers," I said. "It's about people who were never supposed to be disposable." He sighed. "She called me yesterday. Audrey said she's rethinking her firm, wants to learn the supply side better, from the ground up." I said nothing. "She asked me to ask you if she could meet with you, just to talk. Not for a job, just—" He trailed off. I stared out my window at the floor below, dozens of people in motion, in rhythm, in purpose. "I'll meet her," I said. "But not here. Not at the office." "Where then?" "The diner. The old one off Route 8, where I used to take my wife every Sunday before church. It was quiet, unassuming, honest, just like the version of me she thought she erased." We met a week later. She was dressed down. Jeans, blazer, no makeup, no entourage, no screen between her and reality. "Thank you for coming," she said. I just nodded. She ordered coffee. Black. I waited. She spoke first. "I was wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About you. About the company. About what mattered." "And what matters now?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. People. Purpose. I didn't get that before. I thought leadership was cutting out what was old to make room for what's new. "Leadership," I said slowly, "isn't subtraction. It's construction. You build with people, not over them. She nodded. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. Then do that, I said, finishing my coffee. Somewhere else. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say more. Maybe apologize, maybe beginning. But she didn't. She just whispered, "Goodbye, Ethan," and left. I sat there for a while, watching the waitress pour refills and greet regulars like family. No one knew who I was, or what battle I'd just walked away from. But I knew. I went back to the office that night and found Greg waiting with a flash drive. "We finally cracked her old accounts," he said. "Everything you suspected. Confirmed. Money trails, fake vendors, asset sell-offs. You want to go public?" I stared at the drive. I thought about the headlines, the vindication, the gloating, the damage. Then I handed it back. "No," I said. "She already lost everything that matters. We don't need to ruin what's left." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "You're a better man than me." "No," I said. "Just done bleedin'." Weeks passed, then months. The floor ran smoother every day. Clients returned. Old ones brought new referrals. I found myself laughing again, sleeping through the night, believing for the first time in years that I could build something not just profitable, but meaningful. One night, I walked through the operations floor alone. Lights low, machines resting. Just the hum of servers and the quiet tick of time passing. I thought about Emma, about the years we spent building a life that seemed quiet from the outside, but was full of moments that made everything worthwhile. I whispered into the stillness. We made it, not just past betrayal, past grief, past being underestimated. We made it through, not as victims, as architects, builders, survivors. Audrey had fired me, thinking she was cutting out dead weight. What she really did was cut herself off from the only part of the company that had roots. And without roots, even the tallest tree falls in the first storm. In the end, she didn't destroy me. She revealed me. And everything she built, everything her father built, now stood stronger, not despite her betrayal, but because of it. You see, revenge isn't slamming the door on your way out. It's holding the keys when the doors reopen. She wanted me gone. Instead, she gave me everything. The company, the future, the legacy. She stole a title. I rebuilt an empire. And now, she watches it from the outside, alone, while we thrive.